Welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Brit Smith. This week, we're continuing our season of medical marijuana by learning how cannabis can help with problems that are specific to female bodies. Now, even if you're not a person with a uterus, stay tuned because there's still a lot to learn in this episode about using pot for pain, how it impacts fertility, and whether infused lubricants are safe to use in bed. When it comes to switching to cannabis in place of pharmaceutical medications, way more women than men have been opting for pot over the last 5 years. And that's probably because it works for us. Females face all kinds of issues throughout our lives that studies show can be safely mitigated with compounds in the cannabis plant. For example, as women, I probably don't need to tell you, but we deal with a lot of stress, and cannabis can take the edge off after a very long day, or without the hangover. Many females also find the instant onset of smoked weed is essential as a pain reliever for surviving a week of cramping every month. Others report that tinctures help to lessen hot flashes during menopause, and a ton of women report using cannabis to help enhance their libidos. But then there are also some studies that show in certain instances cannabis is definitely not the best option for some people, like for those who are pregnant or are trying to get pregnant. This episode, we're going to learn all about cannabis for women's health with Dr. Becky Lynn. She's an OBGYN, menopause specialist, and sexual health expert who treats many of her patients with cannabis. She's a mom, and she's the CEO and founder of Evora Women's Health in St. Louis, Missouri. We're going to talk to Dr. Lynn about using cannabis for pain associated with periods, endometriosis, chronic pelvic issues, and for sleep and anxiety. We're also going to cover what the studies show about whether marijuana is safe for people who are trying to conceive, for pregnant people who may want to use it for nausea and stress, and for people in menopause. And we're going to discuss how cannabis can help with sexual pleasure for women too. We'll be right back with Dr. Becky Lynn after this quick break. Very nice to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Becky Lynn. Am I right in saying that you're also a UC Berkeley grad?
I am, yeah.
Yes, go Bears, cool.
Go to Berkeley?
Oh yeah, I went to Berkeley.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a long time ago that I went, but go Bears.
Right on. So, but now you're no longer in California. You're in Missouri.
St. Louis. Yep, I'm in St. Louis. My family's still all in Los Angeles, but now I'm in St. Louis.
What made you move to Missouri?
My husband. I met him when I was in medical school in Washington, D.C., and he's from Missouri. So we moved here when I did my residency.
Nice. And I think it was just yesterday that Missouri started recreational cannabis as well. Is that right?
Yeah, it passed. And I don't know if it was yesterday, but it was very recent that you could actually purchase it. So, yeah.
Cool to see new things happening out there all the time.
Yes.
Let me start by asking what's your background and your area of expertise and how did you get involved in cannabis medicine?
Yeah, it was sort of by accident. So I am an OBGYN and I specialize in sexual problems in women like low libido, painful sex. And I used to be full-time faculty at St. Louis University here, and we did research there. And a lot of my patients who saw me for sexual problems would say, and this was before recreational or medicinal cannabis was legal. This was when it was all illegal. And they'd say, well, I have this problem, difficulty with orgasm or low libido. But when I use cannabis, it's all better. And so that prompted me to kind of see what the science showed. And so I went to the medical literature, and really there was just a lack of information, obviously, because it's been illegal. You can't do good clinical trials on it. There were mostly studies in animals like rats and hamsters and things, and then some questionnaires in humans. So I decided to do a study looking at women's perceptions of the sexual experience when they used cannabis. So, it was a questionnaire, and we had a busy OBGYN office. So anybody who came into our office was offered the questionnaire, and we collected over 300 questionnaires, and then we published that study. So I just found it by accident.
Wow.
Me personally, I'm not a big cannabis user at all, but it fascinated me and interested me. And since then, I've gone on to publish we did a review, we did another review recently, and now I teach the pharmacology of cannabis at St. Louis University.
That's cool.
Right. So St. Louis University has programs for adult learners. And when medical cannabis came to Missouri, we didn't really have a workforce who knew anything about it.
Right.
So SLU developed a program, SLU is St. Louis University, to train the work. So, if you're a bud tender in a dispensary, you learn about the pharmacology of cannabis. So,
wow, I'm so glad to hear that that is now being taught, because one of the things that fascinated me about cannabis was how it works for every single ailment. Like, I'd found it useful for when I had gallstones, the pain that I would get. My husband is a veteran and was using it for PTSD.
Oh, yeah.
I'd heard that some cancer patients were using it for pain. And I was like, how is it that this one plant is so useful for so many different ailments? And I mean, I learned about the endocannabinoid system, and I was just like, why is this not being taught in more places? I'm glad to hear now it is. But
Right.
that sort of leads me to my next question, which is, how is it that cannabis is so useful for so many issues, not just for women, but for every human?
That's because of the endocannabinoid system. It's all over your body in so many different systems. And what's interesting about it is we didn't know about the endocannabinoid system until like the 1960s. We found it because we were looking for the receptors that cannabis binds to in the human body. So we knew about cannabis, obviously the plant, and we were looking to see how it has its effects, and we found the endocannabinoid system. So it was almost by accident. But the endocannabinoid system is all over your brain. It's in your reproductive tract. There are a lot of cannabinoid receptors in the uterus. So it plays a role in fertility, in your ovaries. Of course, I know the most about the reproductive side, but it really is in so many different body systems.
So that is exactly where we want to start talking about things. For anybody who has a uterus, there are so many ways that cannabis can be useful for us. Let's talk about what the most common issues are that you see either coming to you or that the studies show are really useful for females.
Yeah. So one place where it's useful that I see a lot because I do sexual dysfunction is in women with endometriosis who have chronic pelvic pain.
Wow.
And it's thought that cannabis works really well for neuropathic pain, meaning pain that's originating from the nerves, not like the nerves that travel from your abdomen or your pelvis up to your brain, as opposed to the nerves in your brain. And even in Canada, it's third line choice for neuropathic pain. And endometriosis has a large component of neuropathic pain, meaning women have pain. There's not like some injury or insult. Like if you take your finger and put it in a candle, that's not neuropathic pain. There's like injury to your finger.
Right.
So cannabis works really well for that. So I use that often in my practice. It's not first line choice, but it is, there's definitely a role for it in people with chronic pain, and it keeps them off opioids.
That's a very positive thing, right? If you're using something for pain and it's chronic, you don't want to be stuck on something like opioids forever.
Right. The other place I see my patients using it are for sleep and anxiety. It seems to work really well for sleep.
Yeah, I'm not surprised there. I'm a lifelong insomniac, and I've found for a long time that small amounts of THC at night really help me get to sleep.
Right.
Where should women start if they're thinking about trying to use cannabis, or if they're not in a legal state for medical cannabis, they can use maybe CBD products that are on sale now. What should they know about starting out for using these kinds of products for pain?
Yeah, start low and go slow. So especially if you're not a cannabis user, your body's naive to its effects. The last thing you want is to go use a whole bunch. And when it comes to how it's used, I recommend against smoking because it's bad for your lungs. I recommend either edibles or a tincture. So with my patients, I almost always recommend an edible. It lasts longer. So it's a slower onset, but it lasts longer. So like for sleep, it's good. For pain, it's good. And I usually have them they're usually 10 milligram edibles, like little gummies, and divide it in fourths. So they start with the 2.5.
Yeah.
The other thing I do is I combine it with CBD. So you can get like a 1-to-1 ratio is usually where I start of THC and CBD. And CBD sort of negates some of that high feeling because if you're using it for pain, you're using it to treat a medical condition. So it's not like you're using it to get high. So, maybe you don't want all those high effects. So I'll combine it with CBD. So it'll be like a 1-to-1 THC to CBD. And then if they need more for pain, then maybe I'll go up on the ratio a little bit more THC to a little bit less CBD. If they feel too high, then you can go up on the CBD and down on the THC.
So that really counteracts any of those unwanted side effects from the THC. I definitely get that way. Yeah, there's sometimes that I don't want to be all in my head, especially when you're trying to sleep.
Right. Yeah.
So it's good for pain, it's good for sleep and insomnia. Let's talk about some of the other issues that females face, like if you get your period every month, that's possible to suck every single month. So I know a lot of women that use it on a monthly basis for period pain.
Yep, definitely for cramps. Yep. And like I said, the uterus is chock full of endocannabinoid receptors. So that's probably why it helps.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If we're moving on a little bit in life, some of us get pregnant. And a lot of the time, folks I've heard say that CBD helps for nausea. Some people say smoking THC helps for their morning sickness. What does the science say? What does the research say on whether cannabis is safe for pregnant people?
Right. We don't know that it's safe. And partially because there haven't been any randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials because it's been federally illegal. And because I'm an OBGYN, I'm really hesitant if we just don't know because there's not good data, then when you're pregnant, don't use it.
Right.
And the problem with the studies that we do have is there are a lot of confounding factors. Like, they're mostly observational studies, and they might say, oh, people with cannabis tend to, have preterm babies. Or small babies. Let's use that as an example. But people use cannabis are more likely to be smokers, tobacco smokers. So there are confounding factors. So I really don't recommend it. I'm sure it helps. But, being an obstetrician, if you don't know, don't expose your baby.
And is that the same for folks who are trying to get pregnant? Like, is there any fertility issue that can happen from using cannabis?
Actually, there is. So it can delay ovulation or prevent you from ovulating.
Oh, wow, really?
If you're trying to conceive, I wouldn't do it.
That's really good to know.
Yeah, it affects how your ovaries function. Like your brain sends a message to your ovaries to grow a group of eggs, and then one wins and you ovulate. But cannabis affects that whole cascade of things that happen to get you to ovulate. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend it if you're trying to get pregnant.
Is it impacting how our hormones work in our body as well?
Yeah.
So has there been a lot of research done into people who are trying to get pregnant or people who are pregnant? Have there been, there's ethical issues there. So how do they do that research?
So that's why there's not a lot of good studies for pregnant women. There are studies on fertility though. And that's where those studies show, delayed time to ovulation or no ovulation at all. So if it's going to take you longer in between the times you release an egg, that's going to lengthen the time it takes you to get pregnant.
Yeah.
Or if you don't release an egg, then you're not going to get pregnant. So it can affect fertility for sure.
And this might be a silly question, but I got to check. Is it the same no matter what method of ingestion? Like, could I use topicals? Is it doing the same thing in my body?
If it gets absorbed systemically into your bloodstream, then yes.
Okay, noted. So we've talked about how cannabis can help females in pain, for sleep, anxiety, and how it affects us for fertility and pregnancy. Now let's talk about an area that you specialize in, which is menopause. How can marijuana help with all of the crap that women have to deal with later in life in menopause?
Yeah, there is some data, questionnaire data, same thing. So it's not double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials, that it helps with hot flashes. And there's actually a really good podcast by a colleague of mine that discusses cannabis and hot flashes. Her name is Dr. Lauren Streicher, Streicher, and she's got a great discussion of cannabis and menopause, cannabis and hot flashes. So yeah.
Is it CBD, THC? Is there a good mix that folks should start with?
So if I were recommending it for hot flashes, I almost always recommend a combination of THC and CBD
Mm.
for that same reason that if you're trying to treat something, you're not trying to get high.
Yeah.
So that CBD will, lessen the chances that you're going to feel high. And especially in someone who doesn't use cannabis, you don't want it all of a sudden, because you can get paranoid and it can not be a good experience. So that's why we start low and raise the dose slowly and combine it with CBD.
Okay. Some good starter points for the kind of curious out there.
Yes.
Is there any sort of medication that if you're taking, you definitely shouldn't be touching cannabis?
There's more interactions with CBD actually.
Mm.
So, as much as CBD is over the counter and unregulated, you really have to be careful with CBD because just because it's when things are, it's always surprising to me that the supplement industry is unregulated and
Yeah.
supplements are drugs like anything else. But CBD is unregulated. So if you're going to use CBD, definitely get it from a reputable source who's done testing so you know exactly what you're getting. And I can't remember off the top of my head, I wish I could, some of the interactions, but CBD is more likely to interact with other drugs than THC.
So it's good to get some guidance if you're on other medications as to whether CBD could interact with what you're taking.
And that's why it's really important for physicians and other practitioners to learn about cannabis medicine because it's so new. It's really not taught in medical school. It's not really taught in residency. And the issue also is that physicians who work for big hospital systems that take federal dollars can't prescribe it. Or it's not like in Missouri, I don't know how it is in other states, but in Missouri, it's not an actual prescription that a physician does. The physician will sign so that the patient can get a card.
Right.
And then they take that card to the dispensary and get what they need from the dispensary. But I think this is an issue because more and more people are using cannabis as a medicine, but physicians don't know anything about it. And they're not inclined to learn about it if they can't do it for their patients anyway. So hopefully that will change if, in the long run, it becomes federally legal. I mean, that would be fantastic because then you could do double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials and do quality research to really narrow down where it can help people the most.
When you send a patient away from you, since you say you can't give them a specific prescription like some states doctors do, you just send them with, a signed piece of paper that says you can go ahead and get a card, and that card allows you access to pretty much anything that's in the dispensary.
Yes.
What is your advice for people that are just going up there and asking the bud tender to give them something good?
Right. So what I do typically is I will go on the dispensary website, find what I want the patient to do and screenshot it and send it to them so they know what the ratio is and what the product is. They can ask the bud tender, but I mean, that's the issue, like with prescribing it as a physician, because typically you prescribe a medicine in the dose you want it. It's very, what's the word? It's, right down to exactly how often, by mouth, edible, tincture, things like that. And so this is just so unusual the way that it's done. But I think that has to do with the fact that it's federally illegal. So they don't want a physician to prescribe it because it's illegal, and physicians don't want to prescribe it because it's illegal and nobody wants to get in trouble. But we still want a way to help our patients have access to it.
Yeah, it sounds like a real Mexican standoff right now.
Yeah, hopefully it's going to get better.
Yeah. Do you think that we're going to see more universities and medical schools talking about the endocannabinoid system and teaching just general practitioners how to include this, or at least how to understand how it might interact with what else their patients are taking?
Yeah, and I think with time, it's just slow. Medicine is a big behemoth of hospital systems and universities, so it will take a while. But I know in Missouri, when medical marijuana first passed, there were physicians who were giving lectures and they were so well attended, like people were interested and wanted to learn about it. I think that desire, because it's not so new anymore, is kind of waxed and waned. I don't see those lectures being given that much anymore, but maybe with recreational, which just passed in Missouri, that might change. I think it's really important for all physicians to know about it, but physicians get really busy with what they're doing. And so if you're not going to do it for your patients, you're not going to sign the card for your patients, then you may not have the time in your life to learn about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So I put out to my audience on Instagram what they wanted to know from you, and a lot of the response was about sexual health for women.
Yep.
So we're talking about using cannabis not just for libido and for pleasure, but also for any other pelvic issues that you might have. What do you think about the use of infused lubricants and suppositories? Are they safe? Are they healthy?
So there's no data. There aren't any controlled studies.
I'm
None that
seeing
I've
a
seen.
pattern here.
Yeah. And I know those exist. Like there are, cannabis infused tampons, there are lubricants. And because those haven't been here in Missouri, I haven't been able to have a patient try it. Maybe that will change now. I hope it does change. But we don't know how much is absorbed into the bloodstream because it can't be studied, or it hasn't been studied like a typical drug would, right? Like there are products you put in the vagina like vaginal estrogen. And in order to get a drug to be FDA approved, they have to study its pharmacokinetics, how much is absorbed, what are the serum levels, and then they have to test it to see that it actually works. So I have not seen any data on lubes, but I think that's a really important question because I also see patients with vulvodynia. And vulvodynia is vulvar pain without, like, there's no infection, there's no ulcer, there's no blister. They just have pain of the vulva. And it's neuropathic pain, meaning the nerves are sending signals to your brain that the vulva hurts, even though there's nothing to treat. And the vulva has receptors called TRPV1 receptors. And we know that CBD binds to TRPV1 receptors. So it's biologically plausible, like it would make sense that cannabinoids would help with vulvodynia. So if you have pain in the vulva and that's getting in the way of your sex life, it makes sense that it would, but there's just no studies.
So it's a maybe try it and see how it works for you sort of situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is topical use down there okay? What should people know about trying to use like oils and lotions and things like that?
Yeah, so it's the same thing. We just don't know. But what I would say is that younger women are less likely to get irritated by topical oils and things like that. And in general, oils like vegetable oil or olive oil, oil-based lubricants are good. They're not irritating to the skin. When you have estrogen around, the vaginal and vulvar tissue is thicker. It doesn't get irritated as easily. But if you're postmenopausal and you're not using a vaginal estrogen, that tissue can get irritated easily. So I would be hesitant. You can try it, but I would maybe try it in one little spot on the vulva first and make sure that it's not going to irritate you. And I would avoid, and this is just in general, avoid like perfumey lubes and good smelling, like fancy lubes, because they'll have perfumes in them and that can irritate the vulva too.
Now, when we're talking about libido and orgasms, I was reading one of your articles that says there, finally, we do have some studies on something. So cannabis is good for libido. Is that right?
So yes, but not too much cannabis. So you have to find that sweet spot.
Of course.
But if you use too much and you can't move and you're really out of it, that's not good for libido. So you really want to find that sweet spot where maybe your anxiety level is lower, so you feel more comfortable responding to sexual cues or wanting more to have sex. But yes, according to the study that we did, our questionnaire, and many studies show this, that libido is increased when you use cannabis.
Any kind of cannabis, or is there like a high strain THC should be out of the question?
That's also a good question. So in the studies that they did, they're just questionnaires. So we have no idea what kind of cannabis people smoked. I will say in my study, 99% of people were smokers. And then the studies that I've seen prior to mine and since mine, they're usually smokers. There actually is one study, I think it's by Eisenberg, that came out after mine, and they did send people, so it was prospective going forward rather than just what you remember, which is not great. People might remember wrong. And I'm pretty sure they did use one specific type of cannabis, but I don't remember for sure off the top of my head. But if anybody's interested, I think it came out of Stanford, and they did look at a validated questionnaire called the Female Sexual Function Index, and they sent people to dispensaries and then saw what happened.
The Female Sexual Index?
The Female Sexual Function Index, or FSFI.
That's a thing? I'm learning so much today. This is the ways that we measure things like pleasure and pain. It's really quite mind-blowing.
Yes. Mhm.
Finally, where can we learn more about your work and more about what you're doing at Evora Women's and now Men's also? Where can we learn more about you?
Yeah, so my main website is evorawomen.com, which is EVORA women, WOMEN.com. We do all sorts of things, not just cannabis medicine, but we do cannabis medicine. We also just launched Evora for Men. And so the website is easy, evoraformen.com. And then would love to have people follow us on Instagram, on Facebook. I have a TikTok. So our Instagram is at Evora Women. At Evora Women's Health, sorry. And that's the same for our Facebook. And our TikTok is Dr. Becky Lynn. So yeah, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and that would be great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us and being one of our very elite guests. We're honored to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
A big thanks to this week's guest, Dr. Becky Lynn of Evora Women's Health. Next week, we're going to be talking about the power of tinctures as medicine with Peter Glantz of Howell's Tincture.
And one of the patients was there, and she had a walker. And she looked at me and she pushed the walker out of the way, and she did this dance around the room and was laughing and was like, I cleaned my house yesterday for the first time in 2 years.
Wow.
And I've been, I normally sit on the couch all day. She's like, the only thing is that I only have a tiny bit left. Like, when am I going to get more?
Yeah.
And hearing other stories like that was the moment when it became a mission. It was like, this is something that I need to continue to do, and to do it so it's continuously available for people.
Yeah. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening right now, and follow us on social media at Different Leaf, and I'm on social media at Brit the British. Check out differentleaf.com for all the issues of our gorgeous magazine, and for the latest winter issue, which is all about medical marijuana. It's available at differentleaf.com and on thousands of shelves across the US and Canada at select Barnes & Noble bookstores, CVS pharmacies, Walmarts, and at select cannabis dispensaries. Find your local in-person retailer or order yourself an issue at differentleaf.com.